Hi, this is Pete Agustinello with SaratogaWine.com, and today I'll be speaking with Rick and John from Albany Distilling, talking about their lineup from Ironweed Whiskey.
Great wine.
Better prices.
Delivered right to your door. SaratogaWine.com.
Where did you start? What was the beginning process? Like, what was the first thing you gravitated towards?
So bourbon was where we really got our start, for the sole reason that it's the most, or one of the most popular spirits out there. Especially from being from New York, we've got phenomenal grain growing here. Way back 10 years ago, it was actually tough to find anything grown in New York State. But fortunately, because we have such a strong dairy industry, there's a ton of corn here for cattle feed. So bourbon was an easy
natural fit.
Exactly. Yep. The key differences between now and 10 years ago is that our bourbon is now at least 4 years old, whereas a decade ago that was not the case. Our first release was 3 months old.
And you started off on 10 gallon?
10 gallons, and then we moved to 25s and 30s.
And what size barrels now?
53s, full size, occasional 59s.
And most whiskey guys are going to want to know like a char level and toast level on your...
By sticking with the same cooperage, consistently, we use two different cooperages now, one for the bourbon, one for the rye, bourbon and malt. We have it dialed into their level of char, and it matches what we want the profile of the whiskeys to be.
Gotcha.
And that being said, both of them are their medium char, or certainly level 3 char, which are slightly different for the two different places.
And I think the grain side of it too, I mean, like you said, you talk about the barrel, you talk about the cooper, but the grain recipe, as Johnny mentioned, like we tweaked that a bunch in the beginning, because a lot of people, when they think about a barrel-aged product, logically you're going to think about that vanilla that you get from the oak. But the difference between a bourbon, a rye, and a malt, goes down to the actual grains that we're putting in the mash tun, and the level of corn or the level of rye, the level of barley, what other grains are in there to kind of support the profile. The younger the whiskey is, or fresh off the still, you can really notice such a huge difference between bourbon and rye.
With the raw distillate,
right?
The smell of it.
The longer it ages in a barrel, there's kind of just like it all centralizes to, all right, how does this interact with the wood itself?
What is the mash bill for your bourbon, your rye, and malt? Has it changed? Has the recipe changed that much now that you're 4 year aging minimum?
It has a little bit, and a lot of it has to do with where we're sourcing the grains, how we're treating them and so forth. Originally in the bourbon we had some malted rye, which is now out. So the bourbon is now 60% corn, 25 rye, 15 malted barley. Rye has pretty much been 75% rye, 25% malted wheat from the start. And the malt is one that we're kind of playing with now even. Right now it's mostly malted barley, and then we've got some wheat and oat in there. And we're thinking about transitioning to just malt, just doing a single malt.
Oh, wow.
It's a fun thing to play with.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
First, I think we should start with the one and only Albany Distilling Co. bourbon. From my memory of it over the years, like I had the opportunity early on to try it from the early days and a couple years ago to now, and it absolutely, in the nose, it's a much cleaner, rounded whiskey.
Yeah.
I get a little bit of vanillas, a little bit of cherry, not too much. It's not like a very pronounced. That has come a long way. I gotta say, this is honestly the first time I've tried it in over a year, and it's a fantastic little bourbon, man. This has come a long way.
The big jump was from 2 years to 4 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really where the most, I think, polishing and refinement happens, isn't that?
Yeah, it's absolutely more. It has been rounded, a little bit smoother. You don't have that really medicinal alcohol burn that you got on the younger whiskeys. You get a little bit of the oak tannin, a little bit of vanilla. And you still taste the grain.
So I think your bourbon drinkers out there, where they might drink bourbon expecting it to be a wheated bourbon, like you should drink our bourbon knowing that it is a high rye.
I like that dryness from the rye.
Yeah.
It is not a sweet whiskey. I think it's a great cocktail whiskey on the rocks. But to your point, it is unique, and I I like that the dryness of it, and it's got a long finish, and you absolutely get the rye on the palate, and you get the sweetness of the corn up front, and then the rye on the finish. Cool. Let's move on. Let's get into the rye.
All right.
The cherry notes you were talking about with the bourbon,
Oh yeah,
even more pronounced now.
absolutely, and more graininess. You get the smell the dryness of the rye right up front. The rye is clearly defined. It's not masked at all by the wheat. It's got that old-timey flavor, like that almost like a barnyardy oak, woody. It's a hearty rye,
Yeah, and again,
but it's soft on the finish. Wow.
We get a lot of what I refer to as the baking spices too. We get some cinnamon there, some clove.
rye is such a cool whiskey that you can drink it on the rocks and you don't kind of get that to be muted in a way that you're just like missing it. It's just like, all right, I drank the rye and it's gone. Like this stuff will linger with you for
Yeah, it has a long
30,
finish.
40
it opens up
Even with
nicely.
the water's
Yeah.
not going to
Yeah.
cut it apart
Yeah.
there. Fantastic.
The big difference between the malt and then versus the rye or the bourbon is that the malting process roasts the grain, or toasts the grain, I should say. So it really transforms that grain forwardness. It is a very traditional kind of a whiskey, and
That is complex. That has got a lot of flavor in there. I mean, you could pull out the oak and oat, not oak,
And
oat.
super interesting to drink it right after drinking the rye because they are completely different whiskeys.
yeah.
I get a little more sweetness out of it because of
Yeah.
the grains, and
Yeah.
more pronounced than both the bourbon and the rye. But it's not a cloyingly sweet. It's just it's there.
It's like creme brulee, like that,
Right.
like really mild
Caramelized.
sweetness.
Yeah, especially if you think about what 3 grains are in there. If it's malted barley, it's going to have that kind of, well, again, it's been malted, so it's already been kind of transformed. Barley is a very plump grain, got a lot of starch in it. Wheat is that soft grain, and oat, to me, is...
It's a showstopper in this one.
It's unmistakable. Like, you can taste oat without question, and it also provides such a cool, like, body to the whiskey.
Right, but they're melded together, very balanced. Like you could taste each individual grain, but the way they're composed, it's like
Another
a little
interesting
harmony in there. Click the link in the description below if you'd like to watch the entire Spotlight review with Rick and John from Albany Distilling Company.